Most players know Ethan Winters as the guy who went looking for his missing wife. But the real truth is much darker. His life was doomed years before that email ever hit his inbox, tied to a bioweapon he didn't even know existed. To understand who Ethan really was, we have to go back to the moment his life quietly fell apart, long before he ever stepped into that Louisiana swamp. Settle in, relax. No sudden sounds, just calm, complete Resident Evil lore. Part 1. Ethan Winters before the nightmare. The defining characteristic of Ethan Winters before his descent into the world of bioweapons and biological horror was his absolute, almost mundane normalcy. He was, by all accounts, an entirely average systems engineer, living a quiet, unassuming life in an unremarkable part of the United States. His existence was defined by stability, predictability, and a deep commitment to the domestic routines of marriage. This initial state of normalcy is not merely background detail. It is the crucial narrative device that makes his subsequent transformation and suffering so effective and profoundly relatable. Ethan was not a trained operative. He did not possess military skills, and he was certainly not a member of an elite biohazard countermeasure team like STARS or the BSAA. He was the everyman, the quintessential ordinary person, thrust violently into an extraordinary nightmare, which makes his eventual heroic endurance all the more poignant and tragic. The structure of his life was centered entirely around his marriage to Mia Winters. Their relationship appeared, on the surface, to be a functional, loving partnership, built on shared experiences and mutual affection. However, beneath the veneer of suburban contentment lay a deep, fundamental secrecy that ultimately doomed their union. Mia maintained a professional life, cloaked in ambiguity and purposeful evasion. Ethan was told, and seemingly accepted, that his wife worked in the unexciting, vaguely defined field of logistics for a shipping company. This explanation was designed to be dull, thus discouraging further inquiry, effectively concealing her true, terrifying involvement in corporate bioterrorism. Ethan, trusting and perhaps slightly passive, accepted this large, unexplained gap in his wife's history, choosing instead to focus on the shared present. This trust, this willingness to overlook the significant unknown within his marriage, became the original sin of his life, a choice that would cost him his peace, his health, and eventually his physical life. The core tension of the Winters marriage, therefore, was this unspoken lie. Mia's elaborate deception meant that their entire relationship was sitting on a ticking time bomb. The revelation that the woman Ethan loved was not an innocuous logistics specialist, but an operative for a sinister bioweapons research organization known as The Connections. This organization was dedicated to developing and trafficking biological weapons, the very things Ethan, as a civilian, would never encounter. When Mia finally disappeared, her absence was heartbreaking, but entirely explicable within the context of her fake job. Perhaps she was traveling extensively, or perhaps her shipping job had simply required her to relocate. The secrecy allowed Ethan to mourn a wife who had vanished during an innocuous business trip, shielding him entirely from the horrific truth that she was swallowed by the very bioweapon she was tasked with managing. His normalcy was the thick blanket of ignorance that kept him safe, until the moment Mia's frantic, desperate email tore it away. His simple life provided no frame of reference for the monsters he was about to face, making his commitment to finding his wife an act of pure, blind, and tragically misplaced love. This innocent faith is the engine that drives the entire, devastating narrative. Part 2. Mia Winters' Secret. The quiet deception maintained by Mia Winters throughout her marriage to Ethan was a necessary consequence of her real profession. A handler for the Connections, a shadowy and highly dangerous bioweapons research organization. Her true career was centered not on shipping routes or cargo inventories, but on the delicate, high-stakes management of an experimental bioweapon known as the E-type project. This deep, operational secrecy forms the foundational lie upon which the entire tragedy of the Winters family is built. Mia was an active participant in the bioterror ecosystem, a fact entirely unknown to her husband, which transforms her eventual distress call from a plea for rescue into a lethal invitation. Mia's specific role within the Connections was to serve as a handler for the highly valuable and volatile test subject, a little girl named Eveline, designated as the E001 bioweapon. This assignment was particularly insidious because Eveline was genetically engineered to resemble a child, demanding a level of care and emotional management from her handlers that dangerously masked the lethal reality of her infection capabilities. Mia was responsible for Eveline's transport and well-being during critical operations, a job that required both technical competence and absolute, ruthless discretion. She was part of a chain of command dedicated to corporate bioterrorism, and her involvement meant she had full knowledge of Eveline's mind-controlling fungal abilities and the catastrophic potential of the E-type bioweapon. Her expertise lay in the complex logistics of moving a biological weapon of mass psychological destruction, not mere cargo. This critical context makes her insistence on secrecy not just an act of privacy, but an act of essential self-preservation and institutional cover-up on behalf of the corporation. The enormity of the lie becomes apparent only in retrospect after the horrifying events of the Dulvey incident. Mia's calculated decision to tell Ethan that her life was ordinary was an attempt to maintain a facade of normalcy, but it also constituted a massive emotional betrayal. Her husband was committed to a woman whose true identity and livelihood were based on a moral vacuum, dealing in human experimentation and biological horror. When Mia disappeared, Ethan was left with nothing but the empty fiction of the shipping company, a lie that rendered him completely unprepared for the reality of the threat when her email finally arrived. He drove to the Louisiana bayou, expecting to find his wife in some kind of professional danger. Perhaps a corporate mix-up, never once suspecting that she was literally infected by the bioweapon she had helped shepherd. This hidden past is the true original sin that permanently dooms the marriage. It is the core catalyst that transforms their domestic life into the epicenter of a global bioweapons crisis. Mia's direct involvement with the creation and transportation of Eveline is the reason the Winters family, years later, would be targeted by the Megamycete and Mother Miranda. Her lie initiated the chain reaction of death, disfigurement, and the perpetual danger that defines her family's fate. By hiding the truth, Mia inadvertently signed Ethan's death warrant, condemning him to years of relentless combat against the very biological weapon she swore to protect for her sinister employer. The entire saga of the Winters family is a consequence of Mia's decision to prioritize the corporate secrecy of the Connections over the truth and safety of her husband. Part 3. Eveline's creation. How Ethan's life gets doomed. Off-screen. The origins of the bioweapon that would ultimately destroy Ethan Winters' life were forged in an isolated Eastern European village and involved a sinister collaboration between two powerful entities: the ancient sorceress scientist Mother Miranda and the modern corporate bioweapons cartel, the Connections. Eveline, designated E001, was the direct, engineered result of this alliance, a devastating biological entity whose very existence predated Ethan's involvement, but whose primary function was to inflict the very trauma he would later suffer. This background story unfolds entirely off-screen, yet its success is what sets the fatal stage for the events in the Louisiana Bayou and beyond. To give a brief summary of how Eveline was created, she is a synthetic organism grown from a superfungus called the Megamycete, designed to infect humans and create a mind-controlled family hive. The genesis of Eveline lies with Mother Miranda, the central antagonist of Resident Evil Village. Miranda had spent over a century attempting to resurrect her own daughter, Eva, who tragically died from the Spanish flu. Miranda discovered the Megamycete, a colossal subterranean fungal network in the Eastern European village, which possessed the unique biological ability to absorb consciousness and regenerate biomass. She experimented for decades with samples of this mold, but her repeated efforts to find a perfect vessel for Eva's consciousness consistently failed. Frustrated, Miranda eventually collaborated with the Connections, providing them with samples of the mold, the source material for the E-type bioweapon. This corporate collaboration allowed Miranda to gather more data while simultaneously giving the corporation a terrifying new biological product to sell. Eveline was the tragic, lethal result of the Connections' application of this specialized mold. The corporation specifically engineered the bioweapon to infect a target family and create a controlled hive mind. This hive mind was designed to operate under the absolute delusion that the infected individuals were a normal, loving, nuclear family, with Eveline herself acting as the demanding, central daughter. The goal of the E-Type project was control through emotional manipulation, making it a product far more insidious than simple zombies. Eveline possessed the ability to generate the mold spores, infect victims through airborne exposure or direct contact, and violently manipulate their consciousness to force them into her twisted family unit. A crucial, horrifying design feature of Eveline was her engineered rapid aging. To prevent the E-type bioweapon from becoming too powerful or uncontrollable too quickly, the subject was designed to age at an accelerated rate, forcing the handlers, like Mia Winters, to treat Eveline as a perpetually young child. This created an emotional dependency that dangerously masked the lethal bioweapon underneath the appearance of a vulnerable girl. This underlying engineering failure, the rapid aging combined with the unstable mental control, turned the entire E-Type project into a catastrophe waiting to happen. Eveline craved a family, and when she broke containment, that primal desire, amplified by the mold's immense mind control powers, became a lethal mandate. The very creation of Eveline, years before Ethan received his wife's cryptic email, was the moment his life was definitively doomed. The existence of this bioweapon, engineered from Miranda's work and transported by his wife, meant that the fate of the Winters family was sealed by forces utterly beyond their control. Ethan's peaceful life was an illusion, one that the manufactured biological horror known as Eveline was specifically engineered to violently tear down, ensuring that the innocent systems engineer would be pulled into a war that started in a strange Eastern European village and climaxed in a terrifying Louisiana bayou. Part 4. The Dulvey Incident. Setup, Tanker, Storm, and Eveline's Escape. The violent chain of events that directly led to the Dulvey incident and the subsequent years of suffering for the Winters family began on the high seas during a catastrophic storm. The sequence of the tanker, the storm, and Eveline's escape forms the critical, immediate setup for the entire narrative of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. It is the precise moment when the controlled corporate experiment of the Connections spirals irreversibly into an uncontrolled domestic disaster that permanently contaminates an entire region. The incident unfolded aboard the oil tanker SS Tantalizer. This vessel was being used by the connections for the secure transport of their highly volatile subject, Eveline, the E001 bioweapon. Mia Winters was on board, acting as one of Eveline's professional handlers, responsible for maintaining the bioweapon's containment and managing its psychological needs. The entire operation was highly classified and relied on absolute corporate control, a control that was severely challenged when a severe tropical storm unexpectedly struck the region. The treacherous high seas and physical instability of the vessel were the environmental factors that finally provided the opportunity for the sophisticated biological weapon to break free. During the height of the storm, the containment protocols decisively failed. Eveline, driven by her core-engineered mandate to create a family, and perhaps intensified by the environmental stress, successfully broke out of her confinement. Her immediate action was to begin the infection process. She possessed the ability to generate and disperse the highly infectious mold spores, quickly infecting the crew and her primary handlers, starting with Mia Winters. The effects of the mold were immediate and devastating, causing psychological degradation, extreme paranoia, and eventual physical mutation, turning the crew into violent, erratic slaves to Eveline's growing delusion. The tanker quickly descended into a scene of unspeakable biological horror and violence, with Eveline walking through the chaos she created, desperately seeking the attention and affection she was engineered to crave. The ship, already compromised by the storm and now crippled by the intense internal biological outbreak, was rendered entirely unmanageable. It eventually drifted and ran aground in the bayou of Dulvey, Louisiana. The wreckage became a temporary, grim testament to the failure of the E-Type project. Eveline, despite her fragile physical state, successfully escaped the submerged wreckage. She utilized her manipulative powers and her appearance as a frightened little girl to find a new target, a new opportunity to restart her lethal family project. She wandered until she stumbled upon the nearby, unsuspecting Baker family plantation. This entire sequence, the storm, the containment failure, Mia's infection, and the shipwreck, is the unseen origin point of the game's actual events. To put it simply, the tanker incident was the accident that unleashed the bioweapon. By the time the tanker ran aground and Eveline established her new base of operations at the Baker's home, the terrifying incident had already begun. The email Ethan Winters would receive 3 years later was merely the echo of this catastrophe, a residual plea sent by a woman who was already deeply infected and mentally compromised, pulling her unsuspecting husband directly into the mold-based ecosystem that had long been prepared for his arrival. Part 5. The Baker family falls to the mold. The Baker family, consisting of Jack the patriarch, Marguerite the matriarch, Lucas the volatile son, and Zoe the estranged daughter, were, prior to the events of the Dulvey incident, a standard, hospitable family residing in the secluded Louisiana bayou. Their simple, rural existence was suddenly and irrevocably shattered when they encountered the shipwrecked remnants of the SS Tantalizer. Their decision to offer assistance to the apparent victims of the disaster was an act of simple human kindness that tragically and immediately condemned them all to unspeakable biological horror. The family discovered both the highly infectious Eveline and the infected Mia Winters near the wreckage of the grounded tanker. Driven by their innate southern hospitality, they took in the two figures, believing they were offering sanctuary to a distressed little girl and a traumatized woman. This single act of mercy became the point of contact necessary for the mold to enter their home and their lives. Eveline, driven by her core-engineered imperative to create a family, rapidly and effectively infected all 4 core members of the Baker household, using the powerful fungal bioweapon she carried. The infection process was insidious, leading to their profound physical and psychological transformation. Once infected, the Bakers gained several terrifying attributes: extreme regenerative powers, allowing them to heal instantly from grievous fatal wounds; immense superhuman strength, turning them into unstoppable hunters; and a total loss of free will. They became entirely subservient to Eveline's hive mind, operating under the absolute delusion that they were a happy, functional, and loving family, with Eveline as their central, demanding daughter. Their physical bodies were consumed and empowered by the mold, creating the terrifying, grotesque figures Ethan Winters would soon encounter. The tragic figures of the molded Bakers served specific, twisted roles in Eveline's disturbing fantasy. Jack Baker became the relentless, unkillable daddy, constantly hunting Ethan, driven by the delusion that he must force the new arrival to join the family. Marguerite Baker became the grotesque mommy, obsessed with preparing the household and guarding the children. Lucas Baker, possessing a greater, though still twisted, resistance to Eveline's psychological control, maintained enough free will to indulge in sadistic games and intricate torture, becoming Eveline's cruel jester. Zoe Baker was the only one who maintained sufficient consciousness to recognize the true horror of their situation, spending her time desperately trying to find a cure for herself and her family, establishing her as a reluctant, secretive ally to Ethan. By the time Ethan Winters arrived at the plantation, in response to Mia's long-delayed email, the entire family was fully infected and perfectly primed for his arrival. The entire estate, the house, the surrounding grounds, the barn, had become a living, breathing part of the mold ecosystem, a prepared stage designed by Eveline for her final, desperate attempt to complete her family. The Bakers were not random monsters. They were the twisted, tragic result of corporate bioterrorism and spiritual madness, waiting patiently for the new daddy to arrive and be violently inducted into their grotesque fungal family unit. Part 6. Ethan gets Mia's message and drives to Louisiana. The trigger for Ethan Winters' irreversible descent into the nightmare of bioterror was a deceptively simple, digitized distress signal. A cryptic, distorted email he received from his wife, Mia Winters, 3 long years after her initial disappearance. This critical message, which simply and desperately stated, "Come get me," along with the precise GPS coordinates pointing to an isolated, decrepit plantation in Dulvey, Louisiana, represented the exact moment Ethan's ordinary life was permanently replaced by a horrifying, lethal quest. This singular decision to drive to a strange location alone is the decisive action that pulled him into the world of the mold and sealed his personal fate forever. For 3 long years, Ethan had lived with the constant, nagging absence of his wife, presumably accepting the corporate cover story that she had vanished during a routine business trip. The email was not just communication. It was a profound, shocking resurfacing of both hope and trauma. Despite the message's brevity, its distorted quality, and the sheer implausibility of the location, Ethan's actions were driven by 2 powerful, fundamentally human motivators: unconditional love and unwavering determination. His entire identity was anchored in his relationship with Mia, and the abrupt chance to find her, to receive closure, or better yet, to bring her safely home, overrode any sense of caution or self-preservation that a rational person should possess. His decision to go alone underscores his complete lack of understanding regarding the situation's reality. As a systems engineer, he possessed no training for confrontation or high-risk situations. He did not contact authorities. He did not seek professional help, and he did not attempt to verify the source or veracity of the message. He simply got into his car and drove. This act perfectly encapsulates his character arc's starting point. He is the ultimate civilian protagonist, relying solely on his deep emotional commitment to his marriage, rather than any applicable skills. This innocence, while relatable, makes his immediate and brutal victimization at the Baker estate tragically inevitable. The journey to the Louisiana bayou represents Ethan's final, physical separation from the world of normalcy. Every mile driven brought him closer to the dense, mold-infested ecosystem created by Eveline. He was voluntarily driving toward the physical consequences of his wife's lie and his father-in-law's biological creation. His deep emotional need to rescue the woman he loved blinded him to the obvious danger signs, ensuring he would walk right into the meticulously set trap. To give a brief summary of his motivation here, Ethan ignores all common sense because he desperately loves his missing wife and will do anything to find her. This is the pivotal point in the lore, where the story transitions from domestic deception to outright survival horror. Ethan's love for Mia was the ethical foundation of his life, and now that love had become the emotional vulnerability that a ruthless bioweapon, Eveline, would successfully exploit. His determination to retrieve his wife, despite the impossibility of the task and the utter lack of information, is the key human element that makes his eventual transformation and sacrifice so deeply meaningful. He entered the nightmare as a hopeful husband and would soon emerge as a sentient fragment of the very horror he sought to end. This is the point where the life of Ethan Winters effectively ends and the journey of the molded hero begins. Part 7. First Contact. The Guest House, Mia's attack, and Ethan's death. The opening sequence of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, detailing Ethan Winters' first contact with the Baker plantation, is not merely an introductory scare. It is, from a lore perspective, the definitive, traumatic moment of Ethan's actual death and immediate reanimation. This sequence, set within the claustrophobic confines of the guest house, is vital because it immediately establishes Ethan's infected status, providing the necessary explanation for his incredible, inhuman resilience throughout the remainder of the series. Ethan's initial exploration of the decaying guest house immediately exposed him to the powerful mold ecosystem. The air was thick with airborne fungal spores. The walls were coated with the black, virulent growth, and the entire structure functioned as a kind of respiratory organ for the infection. From the moment he stepped across the threshold, Ethan began inhaling the mold spores, initiating the biological process that would integrate the fungus into his cellular structure. This quiet, unseen infection was the ticking clock that preceded the physical violence. Upon finding his wife, Mia Winters, chained in the basement, the scene quickly turns violent and terrifying. Mia is already heavily infected by Eveline's mold, manifesting extreme aggression, super strength, and profound psychological instability. She exhibits signs of the mind control, lashing out violently and speaking in menacing, fragmented phrases. This initial confrontation is designed to shock Ethan and the player, demonstrating that the woman he came to rescue is already lost to the bioweapon. Mia's brutal, sudden attack is the first indicator that Ethan has entered a biological war zone, not a missing person case. The definitive, world-altering moment occurs shortly thereafter, when Jack Baker, the monstrous patriarch, appears. In a moment of cold, unflinching horror, Jack utilizes a chainsaw to sever Ethan's left hand. This injury is presented as shockingly sudden and physically impossible to survive. A normal human being would die within minutes from massive blood loss, hypovolemic shock, and catastrophic organ failure. Ethan Winters should have died right there in the guest house. The fact that he not only survives, but is later able to crudely reattach the severed hand using a simple medicinal fluid is the undeniable, crucial narrative signal that Ethan Winters is already dead and has been completely absorbed by the mold. This brutal, violent injury marks Ethan's true death from a biological standpoint. The mold spores he inhaled upon entering the house had already colonized his body to a sufficient degree. When faced with a fatal injury, the mold's powerful regenerative properties immediately took over. The fungus acts as a powerful bioregenerator, sealing wounds, preventing fatal blood loss, and repairing damaged tissues at an accelerated rate. Ethan's continued movement, his relative lack of pain, and his ability to function after the hand amputation are all explicit proof that the man who drove into Louisiana is no longer a normal systems engineer, but is now a sentient mold host. This horrifying transformation, happening immediately upon his arrival, is the core secret that defines his subsequent heroic journey. Part 8. Ethan as a molded human. Regeneration begins. The astonishing physical resilience displayed by Ethan Winters immediately following his traumatic arrival at the Baker plantation serves as the definitive, undeniable evidence that the man who drove into Louisiana is no longer the ordinary systems engineer. Ethan's ability to survive and function, despite injuries that would be instantly fatal to any normal human, is entirely due to his rapid and total infection by the mold, which instantly transformed him into a unique form of molded human hybrid. This internal biological reality explains why he is able to endure the relentless horror of the Baker house, setting him apart as a protagonist whose survival is literally supernatural. The initial moment of clarity for this transformation is the literal reattachment of his severed hand. A normal human body would enter terminal shock from the amputation and subsequent massive blood loss. Ethan, however, experiences a temporary period of pain and confusion, but the mold spores he inhaled upon entering the guest house, the very house that killed him, had already begun their profound regenerative work. The pervasive fungal biomass acts as an accelerated cellular regeneration system within his body. It seamlessly integrates into his tissue, rapidly knitting together nerve endings, muscle, and bone. This regenerative capacity is immediate and complete, allowing him to survive impalement, multiple gunshot wounds, and the constant physical trauma inflicted by the various members of the Baker family. He can walk off damage that would permanently incapacitate a trained operative, an ability that the game initially presents as a simple gameplay mechanic, but is actually the central, horrifying secret of his existence. This new status as a mold host grants Ethan two critical, life-saving advantages that allow him to navigate the terrifying, infected environment of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. First and foremost is the biological regeneration capability. The mold sustains him by constantly rebuilding and repairing his damaged body, granting him a state of practical immortality against conventional trauma. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, he possesses a near-total immunity to Eveline's mind control. The process of his infection was so sudden and complete, or perhaps his underlying psychological structure was so robustly resistant, that the mold successfully colonized his body without fully subjugating his consciousness to Eveline's hive mind. He is integrated into the fungal network, able to feel the presence of the molded creatures, but his inherent free will remains completely intact. He can think, act, and make decisions based on his own motivation, the desperate need to find and rescue Mia, rather than being forced into Eveline's twisted fantasy of a family member. Ethan's physical structure is therefore no longer a collection of normal human cells. It is a mass of rapidly regenerating fungal biomass, a living embodiment of the bioweapon. He is physically made of mold, a terrifying truth he remains completely oblivious to throughout the events of the first game. He operates under the belief that the medicinal fluid he frequently uses is miraculously healing him, unaware that the fluid is simply activating or accelerating the regenerative powers of the fungal organism already aggressively residing within him. This tragic ignorance is crucial, as it allows him to continue his quest driven purely by human love and determination, while his very physical existence is a testament to the biological monstrosity he is fighting. Ethan Winters is the ultimate paradox, a man whose humanity is defined by his love and determination, but whose survival is owed entirely to the biological monstrosity of the mold that killed him and then chose to animate his corpse. His life has become a continuous act of cellular resurrection, setting him up for the devastating ultimate reveal of his true nature years later in the European village. Part 9. Ethan versus the Bakers, Jack, Lucas, and Eveline's control. Ethan Winters' nightmarish journey through the Baker estate is a sustained psychological and physical battle that serves as a profound demonstration of the sheer power of the mold and the relentless mind control exerted by Eveline. The antagonists are not just random monsters. They are the tragic, corrupted faces of a family subjected to a bioweapons delusion, and their extreme durability showcases the immense regenerative strength of the mold organism that sustains them. Ethan's strange resilience throughout these encounters, where he survives impossible odds, further confirms his own status as a highly resistant mold host. This entire section of the game focuses on how the mold weapon works in practice. The most terrifying confrontation is with Jack Baker, the relentless patriarch, whose entire existence has been reduced to the singular, terrifying function of forcing Ethan to become the new daddy in Eveline's demented family. Jack is essentially unkillable, surviving blunt trauma, multiple gunshots, and explosions, only to regenerate and return moments later, laughing maniacally. This continuous persecution highlights the mold's power, demonstrating that the fungus can sustain life even after the physical body has been reduced to mush. Jack's durability forces Ethan to rely on strategic evasion and temporary incapacitation rather than outright defeat, emphasizing that the mold is a constant, ambient threat that cannot be eliminated through conventional means. In contrast to Jack's blunt force, Lucas Baker presents a different kind of horror, psychological sadism with controlled free will. Lucas is unique among the family members because he received a stabilizing serum from the connections before Eveline's control became absolute. This partial immunity allowed him to maintain a significant portion of his original cruel personality, amplifying his pre-existing sadism. He is not entirely controlled by Eveline's family delusion, enabling him to set up elaborate, murderous traps and intricate puzzles throughout the boathouse and testing facility. Lucas's games serve to psychologically break Ethan, forcing him to engage in a battle of wits rather than just a fight for physical survival. His presence confirms that the mold's effects are variable, creating both mindlessly obedient monsters and hyper-intelligent, sadistic killers. The central source of the danger is Eveline's psychological warfare, which permeates the entire environment. Eveline uses hallucinations, distorted phone calls, and sudden jump scares to constantly manipulate and break Ethan's psychological defenses. Her primary goal is not simply to kill him, but to force him to join her family as a daughter candidate or an obedient father figure. The pervasive atmosphere of dread, the unsettling appearance of Eveline herself in strategic locations, and the constant feeling of surveillance are all tools wielded by the bioweapon to weaken Ethan's mind, making him susceptible to the mold's collective consciousness. This demonstrates the E-type bioweapon's most dangerous capability, the ability to turn biological infection into emotional and mental subjugation. Ethan's journey through the various structures of the Baker property, the main house, the ominous barn, and the complex boathouse, is therefore a constant struggle against a pervasive biological and psychological force. His survival is a testament to his unique status as a molded human hybrid who somehow maintains his emotional core. He endures the physical attacks of the highly regenerative Bakers, while resisting the overwhelming psychological pressure of Eveline, confirming his transition from a passive victim into a determined, resilient protector. Part 10. The truth about Mia and Eveline. The moment Ethan Winters finally uncovers the truth about his wife, Mia, and the true nature of Eveline, marks the profound emotional climax of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. This realization shatters the last remaining vestiges of his former life, forcing him to reconcile his deep love for his wife with the horrifying reality that their entire marriage was constructed upon a foundation of absolute lies and corporate bioterrorism. The truth is revealed in fragmented, terrifying stages, culminating in the deep lore files discovered within the abandoned lab, and a harrowing flashback sequence on the grounded tanker, SS Tantalizer. Through these recovered documents and distorted memories, Ethan learns the devastating reality. Mia was never a logistics specialist. She was a paid, operative handler for the Connections, dedicated to the highly secretive management and transportation of the experimental E-type bioweapon. This discovery immediately recontextualizes Mia's 3-year disappearance and her subsequent violence, transforming her from a mysterious victim into an active participant in the creation of the horror that has consumed the Baker family. The most devastating revelation concerns Eveline. The files confirm that she is not a normal little girl, nor is she a ghost or demon, but a living biological weapon designated E001. Her powers, the ability to generate the mold, control the minds of the infected and rapidly age, are all deliberate features engineered by the Connections, using the unique fungal properties derived from Mother Miranda's original research. Ethan realizes that the small, frightening girl who keeps appearing to him and manipulating his actions is not a child in need of saving, but the literal source of the entire contagion. She is the biological anchor for the hive mind, and her delusion of creating a family is the force that has turned a simple Louisiana family into regenerating, murderous psychopaths. This revelation forces Ethan into an immediate and devastating emotional confrontation with his reality. He must grapple with the knowledge that his marriage was based entirely on a lie about his wife's career that involved corporate bioterrorism and the trafficking of bioweapons. The man who drove to Louisiana out of love for his missing wife now discovers that the trauma he is experiencing is a direct consequence of her secret employment. This emotional betrayal is a key narrative moment for Ethan, defining the transition from rescue mission to a mission of containment and survival. He must now choose between his desperate love for Mia and the necessity of neutralizing the bioweapon she helped create. His subsequent actions, working with Zoe Baker to synthesize the necessary serums and directly confronting Eveline, show that he chooses to accept this new, terrifying reality. The truth about Mia and Eveline is the turning point that transforms Ethan from a passive victim seeking his past into an active protagonist fighting to survive and end the bioweapon threat, even if it means destroying the woman he once loved. he understands that the monster is not just the mold, but the corporate secrecy and the emotional deception that brought the mold to his doorstep. Part 11. Eveline's defeat and Chris Redfield's arrival. The climax of Resident Evil 7. Biohazard is marked by the definitive defeat of Eveline and the subsequent, highly significant arrival of Chris Redfield, an event that transitions the narrative from a claustrophobic domestic horror story into the broader, complex world of corporate biohazard cleanup and control. For Ethan Winters, this sequence represents both the end of his immediate torment and the beginning of a life lived under constant surveillance. Ethan's final confrontation with Eveline is predicated on his successful synthesis of an E-type bioweapon serum. This two-part solution, created with the help of Zoe Baker, is designed specifically to counteract the mold's influence. The final fight is a desperate, violent culmination of the psychological warfare and physical terror Ethan endured. After a grueling battle, Ethan successfully injects Eveline with the serum. The effect is immediate and devastating. The bioweapon's control fails, and Eveline rapidly ages, transforming from the perceived child into her actual physical form, a grotesque, elderly fungal monster, before finally mutating into a colossal fungal entity that engulfs the structure. This massive, final form is the complete manifestation of the mold's power, forced into the open by the neutralizing serum. Ethan, utilizing a prototype weapon provided during the fight, finally destroys the giant fungal monstrosity, seemingly ending the immediate threat of the mold bioweapon. Immediately following the defeat of Eveline, Chris Redfield arrives on the scene via helicopter. Crucially, Chris is not operating under the banner of the discredited original Umbrella Corporation, but rather the reformed Blue Umbrella private military company. This new Blue Umbrella is ostensibly dedicated to counter bioterrorism and cleanup operations, positioning itself as a force for good, even if its origins are inherently sinister. Chris's mission is clear: to extract Ethan and Mia and ensure the complete cover-up and containment of the entire Dulvey incident. The presence of Blue Umbrella signifies that the mold bioweapon is now a matter of global corporate concern. A critical piece of law established here is Chris Redfield's quiet awareness of Ethan's infected status. Chris and his team are highly trained in biohazard recognition, and they would immediately recognize the signs of advanced mold infection in Ethan, particularly his impossible survival and resilience. Despite this knowledge, Chris prioritizes the extraction of the only two living survivors, knowing that the priority is containment and official secrecy. He allows Ethan's infection to slide, a decision made for operational necessity, ensuring that Ethan remains a ticking biological time bomb under the control of the monitoring agencies. The extraction via helicopter, where Ethan is finally lifted out of the nightmare bayou with Mia, marks a temporary victory. Ethan believes he has escaped the horror and saved his wife. In reality, he has simply been transferred from the immediate, localized horror of the Baker house to the subtle, institutional horror of being a high-value biological asset under global surveillance. The ending is not a clean break. It is a transition, achieved through the successful defeat of Eveline, but heavily complicated by the fact that the hero himself is now fundamentally a part of the threat he just conquered. Part 12. Life after Dulvey. Ethan, Mia, and the BSAA. Following the terrifying closure of the Dulvey incident, Ethan and Mia Winters were not granted a simple return to normalcy. Instead, they were immediately placed into a comprehensive program of witness protection, managed and monitored by a combination of the United States government and the BSAA or Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance. This transition from a private nightmare to a highly supervised existence is crucial, as it confirms that the mold threat had placed the Winters family squarely into the crosshairs of global counter-bioterrorism operations. The Winters were relocated to a quiet, seemingly idyllic part of Eastern Europe, provided with a new home and new identities. The goal was to allow Ethan to build a semblance of a normal life, primarily as a distraction from the immense trauma he suffered. However, this domestic tranquility was a facade. Both the BSAA and the semi-reformed Blue Umbrella, Chris Redfield's current employer, maintained an extremely close clinical watch over the couple. The reason for this intense surveillance was the latent mold infection that permeated their bodies. While Mia had been cured enough to regain her consciousness and some stability, and while Ethan had successfully resisted the mind control, both were confirmed mold hosts. Ethan, in particular, was an active biological anomaly, a man whose body was fundamentally composed of the fungal bioweapon, making him a subject of immense scientific interest and a potential future liability. The trauma Ethan carried was immense and multifaceted. He endured the physical horrors of the Baker house, including repeated mutilation and violence. More devastatingly, he endured the profound emotional betrayal of learning that his wife was a covert agent for a bioweapons cartel. Even in their new, supervised life, that fundamental lie lingered, creating an undercurrent of tension and unresolved pain in their rebuilt relationship. The efforts to build a normal life were centered on the birth of their new baby daughter, Rose Winters. Rose's arrival, a child born to two parents who were fundamentally contaminated with the mold, introduced an unpredictable, crucial element into the surveillance matrix. The BSAA and Blue Umbrella's close monitoring ensured that their normal life was in fact a highly controlled one. They were never truly free. The BSAA's interest was focused on preventing any recurrence of a mold outbreak and studying the unique resistance Ethan displayed. This forced supervision added a layer of tension and surveillance to their new European home, turning their witness protection into a form of permanent scientific isolation. They were not merely survivors, they were biological assets. This entire period between the two major incidents confirms that the Winters family tragedy was far from over. Their life in Europe was merely a fragile, heavily guarded holding pattern before the next. Even more destructive phase of the bioweapon saga would inevitably erupt, proving that the mold's reach extended far beyond the Louisiana bayou. Part 13. Miranda studies the mold and targets the Winters. To fully understand the catastrophic events that commence in Resident Evil Village, the narrative must cut back in time, shifting the focus from the infected victims to the ancient source of the horror, Mother Miranda and the massive fungal life form known as the Megamycete. This shift explains precisely why the seemingly safe life of the Winters family in Europe was shattered, revealing that they were deliberately targeted as the final, crucial components of Miranda's decades-long, horrifying plan. Mother Miranda is not merely a regional tyrant, but a brilliant, yet deeply deranged scientist who has spent nearly a century experimenting with the Megamycete in the isolated European village. Her sole, obsessive goal was to resurrect her daughter, Ava, who died 100 years earlier. The Megamycete served as a gigantic fungal mind, capable of absorbing and storing the consciousness of those who died and were buried within its network. Miranda's experiments involved injecting villagers with the mold to create a perfect vessel, a child whose body and consciousness could sustain Ava's returning soul. This experimentation process, spanning decades, resulted in the creation of her four lords, all failed attempts to create the perfect vessel. The key pivot in Miranda's plan occurred when she realized her own local experiments were too unstable. She briefly collaborated with the connections, providing them with a highly refined sample of the mold that led to the creation of Eveline, the E001 bioweapon. When Eveline proved to be a failure, too unstable and prone to aggressive, unpredictable aging, Miranda resumed her own direct research. It was during the 3 years following the Dulvey incident, while the Winters were under BSAA protection, that Miranda discovered and targeted them. She realized the Winters family possessed unique, invaluable properties critical to her RE7 project. Ethan Winters, who had died and been resurrected by the mold, was an anomalous, highly resilient host who maintained his unique consciousness despite total infection. Mia, also a survivor, added to this genetic anomaly. Most importantly, their new daughter, Rose Winters, was born a unique hybrid, a child whose body was a stable, powerful, and almost pure vessel of the mold. Rose possessed properties that closely resembled the state Miranda required for her daughter Ava's resurrection. Miranda did not seek revenge for Eveline. She saw the Winters family as the culmination of her entire biological quest. They were the final, necessary piece of the puzzle. Rose was the ultimate vessel, a mold child whose body could potentially host Eva's consciousness without rejection. Miranda's focus shifted entirely from the general development of the mold to the specific, precise capture of Rose. This realization turns the beginning of Resident Evil Village from a random home invasion into a calculated, necessary act of biological theft, orchestrated by the ancient scientist to fulfill her devastating personal desire. Part 14. The Abduction. Chris Raids. The House and the Convoy Attack. The opening sequence of Resident Evil Village is a carefully orchestrated narrative deception designed to shock the audience while concealing the true complexity of Chris Redfield's urgent mission and Mother Miranda's insidious infiltration. From a lore perspective, this chaotic event, the raid, the convoy attack, and the subsequent crash, is the necessary catalyst that throws Ethan Winters into Miranda's European village. The sequence begins with Chris Redfield and his specialized team, Hound Wolf Squad, executing a highly aggressive, militarized raid on the Winters' quiet home. Ethan witnesses Chris violently kill Mia Winters with multiple gunshots. This moment is devastating and deliberately misleading. The person Chris kills is not the real Mia, but Mother Miranda, utilizing her shape-shifting abilities to perfectly impersonate her. Miranda had already secretly abducted the real Mia and infiltrated the Winters' home, replacing Mia to gain proximity to Rose and complete her observation. Chris and the BSAA were aware of Miranda's infiltration and realized the extreme danger posed by the imposter. Chris Redfield's real, urgent mission was to extract Rose and Ethan and transport them to a highly secure, specialized BSAA laboratory, where Rose's unique biological properties could be studied, contained, and protected from Miranda. The immediate, violent action was necessary to neutralize Miranda's threat and secure the highly valuable child. Chris was not attacking Ethan. He was attempting to save him, and more importantly, save Rose. However, due to the extreme secrecy and time constraints, Chris did not communicate the full complexity of the situation to Ethan, making his actions appear brutal and incomprehensible to the distraught father. Following the raid, Ethan, Rose, and Chris's squad are transported via an armored convoy towards the safe lab. This convoy, however, is attacked and compromised by Mother Miranda's forces, likely Lycans or other loyalists, who were alerted to the BSAA's extraction plan. Miranda orchestrated the attack specifically to interrupt the transport and reclaim Rose. the attack successfully separates Ethan from Chris's unit. Ethan wakes up in the snow next to a wrecked truck, alone and confused, believing his wife is dead, his daughter is missing, and Chris Redfield is a villain. This confusion is Miranda's goal. The disruption of the convoy successfully traps Ethan within the new, isolated European village ecosystem. Miranda now has Rose, and Ethan, the resilient mold host, is strategically placed in the center of her testing grounds. This entire sequence is an example of the sophisticated global operation that Ethan, the systems engineer, has been forcefully pulled into, transforming him from a supervised asset into a determined, isolated protector with a single, overriding mission: to retrieve his daughter at any cost. Part 15. Ethan wakes in the snow. First hours in the village. The moment Ethan Winters regained consciousness in the blinding snow next to the wreckage of the BSAA convoy truck marked his immediate, violent introduction to the second, more ancient, and far more pervasive mold ecosystem. He woke up confused, disoriented, and emotionally shattered, believing his wife Mia was dead, and his daughter Rose had been abducted by the very forces ostensibly meant to protect them. This sudden, brutal transition from a heavily monitored suburban safe house into an isolated, hostile European environment confirmed that the horror he fought in Dulvey, Louisiana, was merely a regional manifestation of a global, ancient biological force. His first hours in the village established that he was once again a stranger trapped in another bioweapon testing ground. Ethan's initial attempts to seek help or understand his location were immediately met with aggressive hostility from the local inhabitants, the Lycans. These are the primary foot soldiers of the village, lupine humanoids engineered by Mother Miranda, using the mold and the Kadu parasite. These creatures are driven by animalistic fury and a pack mentality, marking a significant change from the slow, zombie-like, molded creatures of the first game. The speed and ferocity of the Lycans forced Ethan to immediately shift his mindset from confused victim to hardened survivor. This new, more aggressive environment demands a much higher level of combat readiness, confirming that his status as a regenerative mold host is about to be tested to its absolute limit. The village itself quickly reveals its true nature. It is not a normal settlement, but a massive extension of the Megamycete fungal network, the very source of the mold. The surrounding terrain, the ramshackle buildings, and the persistent atmosphere of dread are all built around this central, ancient life force, which is controlled and manipulated by Mother Miranda. This new environment is a sophisticated, biological prison that is far older and more complex than the temporary infection site of the Baker House. The village is an entire, self-contained mold ecosystem, one where the inhabitants, the four lords, and the surrounding flora are all genetically linked and subservient to Miranda's will. Ethan quickly encounters the remnants of the terrified, uninfected villagers, whose fragmented dialogue and desperate pleas fill in the local mythology. He learns about Mother Miranda, the figure worshipped as a god, and her direct command over the strange, powerful figures who rule the region. This contrast between the desperate humanity of the few surviving villagers and the feral, relentless attacks of the Lycans further intensifies Ethan's isolation. He is an outsider in a deeply entrenched spiritual and biological conspiracy, driven only by the primal urge to find his daughter, Rose, who he soon discovers is being held by Miranda and her 4 powerful lieutenants. His first few hours in the snow-covered village set the desperate tone for his subsequent journey. He is entirely alone, surrounded by a biological threat he partially embodies, fighting against a millennium-old cult built upon a monstrous fungal intelligence. His quest for Rose is now a confrontation with the true, deep origins of the mold itself. Part 16. The Four Lords Through Ethan's Eyes. Ethan Winters' protracted, dangerous journey through the European village is defined by a series of confrontations with Mother Miranda's Four Lords, powerful subordinates who command the various zones of the mold ecosystem. From Ethan's perspective, these figures, Lady Dimitrescu, Donna Beneviento, Salvatore Moreau, and Carl Heisenberg, are not random, diverse video game bosses, but terrifying, powerful obstacles blocking his singular path to his daughter, Rose. However, from a deep lore perspective, they represent the tragic, failed results of decades of Miranda's unrelenting scientific obsession to resurrect her own dead daughter, Ava. Each of the Four Lords was originally a human, subjected to Miranda's experiments. They were all injected with samples of the mold and the Kadu parasite, hoping to find the perfect vessel to host Eva's consciousness. All four were failures, but the injection granted them unique, twisted physical forms and immense distinct powers, allowing them to serve as Miranda's regional rulers. Lady Dimitrescu, the Lord of the Castle, represents the failure of biomass conversion and size. Her immense height and retractable claws are a direct result of the mold and Kadu affecting her human form, granting her incredible strength but ultimately failing Miranda's requirements for the perfect vessel. Ethan's confrontation with her is a horrifying exercise in endurance and navigation through her gothic prison, where he sees her not just as a vampire-like monster, but as a dangerous, controlling stepmother figure, guarding a vital part of Rose. Donna Beneviento, the Lord of the House and Gardens, represents the failure of psychological control. She uses a complex network of dolls, hallucinations, and her unsettling puppet, Angie, to induce psychological terror. Her power is a direct manifestation of the mold's ability to manipulate consciousness and create overwhelming, personalized fear. Ethan's battle with her is purely mental, forcing him to confront the disorienting psychological capabilities of the bioweapon that is trying to break his already fragile mind. Salvatore Moreau, the deformed Lord of the Reservoir, represents the failure of physical stability and form. His grotesque, immense, aquatic body is a catastrophic biological result, a complete physical breakdown caused by the experimental injection. He is a pathetic, deeply insecure figure who is constantly seeking Miranda's approval. Ethan's fight against Moreau highlights the disgusting, unstable physical mutations that the mold can inflict when it fails to integrate successfully. Finally, Carl Heisenberg, the Lord of the Factory, represents the failure of obedience and control. His injection granted him powerful magnetic manipulation abilities, but it did not fully subjugate his will to Miranda. Heisenberg is rebellious, intelligent, and fiercely independent. Ethan's encounters with him are characterized by both physical threat and intellectual manipulation. Ethan, the desperate father, fights through these diverse figures, seeing them as necessary evils in his path to Rose. This long gauntlet of confrontations, each testing a different aspect of his resilience, physical endurance, psychological fortitude, and combat prowess, confirms his unrelenting determination. By defeating the Four Lords, Ethan is systematically dismantling Miranda's failed biological empire, unaware that his own body, which regenerates and endures this endless suffering, is the superior, stable mold vessel Miranda truly desires. Part 17. Heisenberg's offer and Ethan's refusal. The confrontation with Carl Heisenberg, the rebellious lord of the factory, is a critical narrative juncture that serves to explicitly define Ethan Winters' character arc. and cement his unwavering identity as a father driven solely by the protection of his family. Heisenberg, the lord with formidable magnetic powers, was arguably the most independent and politically savvy of Mother Miranda's lieutenants, recognizing her insanity and the inevitable self-destruction of her cult. This awareness led him to make a calculated offer to Ethan, an offer which Ethan immediately and definitively refused. Heisenberg proposed a strategic alliance to Ethan. He openly acknowledged that Miranda was an insane tyrant whose century-long obsession with resurrecting her daughter Eva had rendered her completely unfit to rule. Heisenberg had been secretly developing a powerful bioorganic weapon called the Sturm, a grotesque creature integrated with a propeller that he intended to use to overthrow Miranda. He needed Ethan's help, and perhaps Ethan's strange, stable resilience as a mold host, to confront and destroy the ancient scientist. Heisenberg framed the team up as a matter of mutually assured survival and a chance to take control of the vast mold resources. Ethan's refusal of this alliance is the single most important moment, demonstrating his transition from the passive victim of Resident Evil 7 biohazard into the determined, focused protector of Resident Evil Village. He was not interested in regional power struggles, corporate espionage, or taking sides in a bioweapon war. Ethan's motivation remained pure, simple, and entirely emotional: Rose. He immediately rejected Heisenberg's offer because accepting it would have diverted his attention from his singular, overwhelming priority. He was not there to fight a war. He was there to rescue his daughter, and any alliance that complicated or delayed that mission was irrelevant to him. This refusal confirms the ultimate simplicity and strength of Ethan's character. He had been manipulated by his wife, betrayed by his father-in-law, and used as bait by the bioweapons community. By this point in the narrative, he has shed all traces of his former life as a systems engineer. He operates with a focused, almost primal intensity. He doesn't care about the origins of the mold, the politics of the Four Lords, or the potential for global catastrophe. His world begins and ends with his daughter. He views Heisenberg, despite his clear intelligence and shared enemy, as simply another obstacle, another threat that must be physically neutralized to ensure Rose's safety. His actions here solidify his legacy. Ethan Winters is not a soldier, a spy, or an operative. He is a father. He faces down a powerful magnetic mutant and rejects an easy tactical alliance because the emotional stakes of his mission supersede all tactical or political considerations. This focus is what allows him to succeed where the Four Lords failed. They were obsessed with Miranda's approval or their own power. Ethan was only obsessed with love. Part 18. Ethan's body starts failing. The mold limit. As Ethan Winters fought his way through the village and its horrifying denizens, his impossible resilience, a direct consequence of his total mold infection, began to reach its absolute limit. His body, which had sustained him through countless wounds since the Dulvey incident, started to exhibit clear signs of rapid, visible deterioration and failure. This decline serves as a narrative countdown, highlighting the ticking biological clock of his existence and powerfully leading to the final, devastating reveal of his true nature. The most extreme and crucial demonstration of this failing is the final confrontation with Mother Miranda. During this climactic exchange, Miranda, in a moment of terrifying physical violence, literally rips Ethan's heart out of his chest. This is an intentional act of destruction that is meant to be instantly and absolutely fatal. The fact that Ethan continues to move, continues to speak, and continues to function, albeit sluggishly, is the final, irrefutable proof that the mold organism is the only thing animating his structure. A normal molded creature might survive, but for a being with his level of conscious thought to continue functioning without the most vital organ confirms his reality as a non-living entity. This near-fatal injury and his subsequent function tie back directly to the original trauma in Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Since Jack Baker severed his hand in the guest house, Ethan had been a sentient mold consciousness, a mass of fungal biomass that only mimicked human life. The incredible regenerative powers of the mold were maintaining his form and motor functions, but they could not repair the underlying damage indefinitely, particularly when confronted by the mold's ultimate source, the Megamycete and its priestess, Miranda. His physical degradation, the increasing sluggishness, the crystalline growths that begin to appear on his skin, and the visible signs of decay are the result of the mold struggling to regenerate a body that has taken years of sustained, impossible trauma. Ethan's continued survival, even without his heart, is a horrific, poignant display of his will overriding his physical reality. He is operating purely on the emotional mandate of rescuing Rose. The physical degradation serves to raise the stakes, underscoring that his time is running out. He is not just suffering physical damage. His biological energy source, the mold, is failing under the strain of continuous, high-level combat. The limit of his resilience is being tested, preparing him and the audience for the ultimate revelation. He is no longer fighting for his life. He is fighting past his death. The man who should have died years ago is finally succumbing, but not before completing the one mission that has defined his entire undead existence. Part 19. The Megamycete and Ethan's final sacrifice, the narrative climax of the entire saga, occurs when Ethan Winters finally encounters the Megamycete, the colossal subterranean fungal core of the village, and discovers the definitive, horrifying truth about his own existence. This truth, coupled with the immediate threat of annihilation, forces him into the ultimate act of heroism, a conscious, final sacrifice to destroy the source of the evil and save his daughter. After the brutal confrontation with Miranda and his subsequent near death, Ethan is revived, or rather sustained, by Chris Redfield. It is during this final sequence that the truth, long buried since the events of the guest house, is finally revealed through a recovered Ethan log. Ethan finally learns the devastating, reality-shattering fact. He died in the guest house of the Baker plantation years ago. The man who has endured the Bakers, defeated Eveline, and fought the Four Lords has been, for years, a sentient mold consciousness, a self-aware biological entity animated by the very bioweapon he was trying to destroy. His entire life, since the loss of his hand, was a continuous act of cellular regeneration by the mold. This revelation, while shocking, does not deter him. With his body now rapidly crystallizing, signifying the final breakdown of his mold structure, Ethan realizes his fate is sealed. Meanwhile, Chris Redfield has planted a powerful military-grade bomb at the core of the Megamycete to ensure the total eradication of the fungal source, knowing that only the destruction of the Megamycete can permanently end the mold threat. The bomb is activated, set on a timer, and must be manually triggered or supervised to ensure maximum destructive impact. Ethan makes a conscious, heroic choice. After successfully finding and rescuing Rose, he realizes his body is failing too quickly to escape the collapsing subterranean chamber. Understanding that he is the most effective and final failsafe, Ethan embraces his fate. He hands Rose over to Chris, who is safely positioned for extraction, and then, in his final moments of sentient existence, he walks back toward the core. He knows that as a mold entity, his presence near the Megamycete is highly destructive, and his disintegration will only accelerate the annihilation. Ethan chooses to stay behind and detonate the bomb himself, sacrificing his entire mold-based being to ensure the Megamycete is completely destroyed. This is the ultimate act of atonement, the molded man choosing to destroy the very biological force that created and sustained him, all for the sake of his human family. Part 20. Rose Winters survives. A mold child with human emotion. Ethan Winters' final, deliberate sacrifice successfully eradicated the ancient source of the mold, ensuring the survival and future of his daughter, Rose Winters. Rose is not, however, a normal child. She is the living legacy of the Winters family tragedy and the ultimate biological product of the mold's interaction with human life. Rose is a unique and powerful mold child, possessing both the immense biological power derived from the Megamycete and the deeply entrenched human emotions passed down from her father. Rose was born to parents who were both mold hosts. Her body, therefore, became the perfect, stable vessel that Mother Miranda had been desperately seeking for a century. The mold integrated into Rose's DNA with a stability and purity that surpassed all of Miranda's failed experiments. This genetic inheritance granted her immense, latent superpowers, powers to manipulate the mold, crystallize bioweaponry, and most importantly, retain a subconscious connection to her father's consciousness through the remnants of the destroyed Megamycete network. This power makes her a subject of intense interest and a potential danger to the world she was saved into. Ethan's sacrifice means that Rose can live a life defined by freedom, but she will also live one defined by a unique set of profound challenges. She is a biological anomaly in a world that fears bioweapons. Her powers require constant monitoring and management, ensuring she remains under the watchful eye of the BSAA, much like her parents before her. Her existence raises complex ethical and scientific questions for the post-bioterrorism world. She is not merely a survivor, she is the next generation of the bioweapon phenomenon, capable of both great help and unimaginable destruction. Crucially, Rose's story is defined by the depth of her human emotion. Despite her fungal origins, she retains the memories, love, and emotional connection to her father's sacrifice. This human core is what makes her the opposite of Eveline, the first mold child. Eveline was driven by engineered malice and the delusion of family. Rose is driven by genuine affection and the memory of her father's love. She is the biological proof that the human spirit, the sheer defining willpower of Ethan Winters, could successfully override and channel the destructive power of the mold for good. Rose is Ethan's final physical triumph, a vessel of immense power guided by profound humanity. Part 21. The Epilogue. Rose at the Grave and Chris's New Mission. The narrative conclusion of Resident Evil Village transitions the story into an epilogue set several years after the definitive destruction of the Megamycete, providing a somber, lingering view of Ethan Winters' legacy and the ongoing, unending threat of corporate and global bioterrorism. This final sequence features the grown Rose Winters at her father's grave and the introduction of a disturbing new mission for Chris Redfield. The first significant image is Rose Winters, now a young adult, visiting her father's unmarked grave. This emotional moment confirms two things: that Rose is continuing to live a life under intense armed surveillance, and that the sacrifice of her father, the man who was technically a sentient mold entity, is remembered as the ultimate act of human love. The presence of her protective, armed security detail underscores that her life is anything but normal. Her unique status as a mold child means she is a constant target for organizations seeking to exploit her genetic power. Simultaneously, the epilogue introduces an ominous note of continuing global conflict. A sniper on the hill is shown watching Rose, a clear indicator that the world of bioweapons and shadowy organizations did not end with the destruction of the Megamycete. The sniper represents the perpetual threat of exploitation and the continued necessity of security. This brief but potent scene suggests that while Ethan destroyed the mold's source, the corporate hunger for bioweapons, the kind that employed Mia and created Eveline, remains active and relentless. The final action centers on Chris Redfield, now a higher up in the BSAA, heading to the organization's Europe headquarters. This detail is crucial because it implies that the fight against bioweapons is not only ongoing, but is now centered on an internal threat. The game heavily hints that the BSAA itself might be compromised, having utilized bioorganic weapons in its own operations in the village. Chris's new mission is therefore likely an internal struggle, a necessary fight to clean up the corruption within the very counter-bioterrorism force that was meant to protect the world. The epilogue leaves Ethan's legacy clear. His sacrifice was successful in saving his daughter and ending the immediate threat, but the world he saved is still deeply and fundamentally dangerous. Rose is left to navigate her powerful, anomalous existence in a world where her father's struggle for humanity and control must now be her own. The narrative closes by confirming that the consequences of corporate bioterrorism and the need for heroes like Ethan will continue long after the hero has found his final rest. Part 22. Ethan Winter's Legacy. The man who should have died in Louisiana. The full, complex journey of Ethan Winters stands as the definitive, tragic core of the entire Resident Evil saga, transforming the franchise's narrative from a collection of isolated zombie outbreaks into a profound, personal epic about guilt, perseverance, and ultimate redemption. His comprehensive arc, which began with his simple, ordinary life as a systems engineer, and culminated in the deliberate immolation of his own mold-based body in the subterranean depths of the Megamycete, provides the essential human anchor for a story otherwise saturated with bioweapons and corporate conspiracies. This legacy is not one of a trained operative, but one of the ultimate everyman hero, a father who willingly gave his life not once, but effectively twice, to protect his family and to finally end the virulent threat he accidentally stumbled into. Ethan began his story as the most passive of protagonists, a deeply normal man thrust into a highly extraordinary world. His sole motivation for driving into the Louisiana bayou was the deeply human, emotionally pure desire to save his wife, Mia, a woman whose secrecy defined their entire married life. This very act of love led directly to his first death in the guest house. From that moment forward, Ethan Winters was no longer a living human being, but a sentient mold consciousness, a walking, regenerating embodiment of the bioweapon he sought to defeat. This transformation, from the normal guy to the undead mold host, is the critical paradox of his character. The man whose body was a monstrous lie maintained a soul that was fiercely, uniquely human. He operated for years on an emotional mandate, driven by a determination that surpassed the mechanical reality of his existence, spending his entire mold life correcting the corporate horrors introduced by his wife and father-in-law. His long, grueling path to redemption was marked by unparalleled physical suffering, all of which he endured due to the mold's regenerative power. He fought relentlessly against the monstrous, twisted figures of the Baker family, resisted the profound psychological warfare of Eveline, and survived the corporate cleanup by the Blue Umbrella. Even when relocated to the apparent safety of Europe, he was a ticking biological clock under surveillance by the BSAA. His survival was not luck or skill, but the sheer, horrifying efficacy of the fungal organism that sustained him, a reality that only intensified his personal mission when the ancient figure of Mother Miranda targeted his daughter, Rose, as the perfect new vessel. Ethan faced the four lords, Dimitrescu, Beneviento, Moreau, and the rebellious Heisenberg, not as a soldier clearing threats, but as a father ruthlessly eliminating obstacles blocking his path to his child. His refusal to side with Heisenberg's revolution, focusing only on Rose, confirmed that his moral compass remained centered on the most basic human need: protection. The profound tragedy of his journey culminates in the final, devastating revelation that he had died years ago, and his life since then was merely a protracted act of biological animation. Yet, this truth does not lead to despair or surrender. Instead, it empowers his final act. He understands that his body, made of the mold, is the one force capable of ensuring the Megamycete's ultimate destruction. His decision to willingly stay behind in the collapsing caverns, with his body rapidly crystallizing, and to personally detonate the military-grade bomb, is the crowning achievement of his self-sacrificing legacy. He, the living bioweapon, chooses to destroy the source of all bioweapons, saving his daughter and the world at the cost of his own impossible existence. This act of self-immolation is the ultimate penance for the unwitting role he played, through his wife's lie, in bringing the mold to the forefront. Ethan Winter's legacy is therefore secured as the everyman's savior. He was an ordinary man who was forced into extraordinary circumstances, and despite being transformed into a monster, chose to act with more courage, integrity, and humanity than the scientists, corporations, and military organizations that surrounded him. He is the ultimate reflection of the idea that true heroism is not defined by training or physical power, but by the relentless, sacrificial love for one's family. The man who should have died in the Louisiana guest house, the man who was nothing more than sentient fungal tissue, ultimately became the necessary, tragic hero who broke the cycle of bioweapon terror, ensuring that the legacy of his daughter, Rose, would be one of survival and hope rather than infection and despair. His story provides the definitive, emotional closure to the origins of the mold, confirming that even the darkest biological horror can be defeated by the simplest and most enduring of human bonds: